Guys, welcome back to our channel. My name is Rick. Today we got a really cool episode with a rare opportunity to look at a different car comparable to the NSX Type-S, which is a Ferrari 296. Now, if you remember when we did the review video on this car, which was a couple years back, we mentioned some of its competitors being, the Corvette and, the Altera. But Ferrari didn't really have a competitor back then against this particular car. Acura was way ahead of its time with the twin-turbo 6, 3 electric motor power plant, which was only found in hypercars, right? P1s, LaFerraris, 918s. So fast forward to 2025, we got this 296. The 296 is actually Ferrari's closest competitor to the Type-S because they're both similar hierarchy, right? They both got V6 twin turbos, they both have electric motors. This one puts out 819 horsepower compared to 605 on this car. Ferrari always does things a little bit differently. Its predecessor, the SF90, was also a hybrid electric, but that was a V8 twin turbo. So now the question is, V6 twin turbo, hybrid electric, what makes these two cars tick? So we're gonna show you a little bit between these two cars, so follow along if that's what you wanna see. Thank you. All right, so outside, we got the two cars behind me. When it comes to looks and sound, I know those things are always subjective. Both cars look very different from each other, as you can tell. They sound a little bit different. Our Type-S has been modified, so it's got downpipes and exhaust. The Ferrari is stock. So we'll listen to both of them and see which one you guys like. But sound-wise, at idle, they both sound pretty good. So let's take a look. When you look at the cars from the outside, the pedigree of both these cars couldn't be more different. One car, built, bred for speed, racing heritage. The other car has a long history with Acura being the NSX, but it's a very new platform, totally new type of design, new car, new power plant. So the question is, which manufacturer did it better and which one would most customers prefer? The cool thing about Ferraris is they don't share really any parts with other cars or brands. So everything from the interface, the buttons, the dash, they're all unique. One of the unique design cues with the new Ferraris, these modern Ferraris, is the steering wheel. They went to a thinner, more compact, more fluid type of a wheel. Whereas in the old days, if you've driven an M3, M3s have very robust, beefy, fat steering wheels. And generally speaking, people like fatter steering wheels. But now the design seems to be going more minimalistic with these thinner wheels. Looking at the car from the rear, the unique three-dimensional glass surface for that engine cover is smoked slightly and frames that engine perfectly. This rear end is pretty cool because it features a truncated tail, integrated spoiler, and it also has some pretty unique design elements that includes a black painted bar and the active rear spoiler. When asked about the design of the 296, Ferrari's chief design, Flavio Manzoni, he was quoted saying, well, this particular car is heavily influenced by the 250 LM, and you can clearly see it in the design of the 296 today. When asked about the design of this 296, Flavio pretty much said this one was about elegance and simplicity. And I think when asked what that meant to him, he simply said simplicity is complexity resolved. So I think that's pretty legitimate with this type of car because there is so much complexity of different systems going on. But the end result is a V6 turbo car that drives like no other V6 we've ever driven. One thing I want to say here is I know in videos it's hard to convey the sound of an engine using a microphone, but this has probably got to be one of the best sounding V6s that we've ever drove. I mean, other V6s an honorable mention, I think, like the Ford GT 3.5 EcoBoost, the Volkswagen VR6, the NSX 3.0 liter V6 from the first gen, and then finally, of course, you got the GT3 motor, which we don't count it as a V6 because it's more of a flat 6. I got my son Ian with me, and he is nothing huge in cars. He's been in all the cars, the NSX, the 458, and now the 296. So, Ian, what do you think about this car compared to the 458?
Well, when I think about this car compared to the 458, I feel the one named Saba has no rooftop. You can move up
okay,
to.
this is a coupe, right? They do make this in a Spider though. Yeah.
And then it's more quiet, and then a lot more gadgets and tricks in the 296 than in the Ferrari. And then I get my own touchscreen and the radio.
Show them the touchscreen. What touchscreen are you talking about?
Here
awesome. You get your own little command center.
Yeah.
You like that?
It's much better, and then also it's lots more things on the wheel, panels.
So what do you think about this compared to the NSX now? Because you've been in the NSX. Do you think the NSX feels better, or do you think this car feels better?
Well, this car is actually more like silent, but much faster than the Acura NSX. So this one, but it's definitely much more modern than the Acura NSX. So I think this one I like better.
You like this more than the NSX? Okay. But this is hard to use. Do you notice the radio is really hard to use on this thing?
Yeah.
Like Daddy couldn't even figure out how to turn the volume up on this thing for a while. Right? The NSX, everything's easy because it's pretty much accurate, right? So it's a lot easier. What about speed? Now you felt the car earlier. You felt how fast this car is. What about speed-wise?
Speed-wise, this is definitely faster than the Ferrari 458.
And the NSX?
The NSX is slightly faster than the 458, but this one still outstrips it by a lot.
Well, you're talking 200 more horsepower in this car. So the NSX that you rode in has 605, 610 horsepower. This thing has 820. So it should be faster, right?
Yeah.
So your butt dyno works. All right, thanks for your input, Ian. So Ferrari has done a really good job on this car. Check out the key that came with this vehicle. It's got carbon, it's got the insignia. This thing can stay in your pocket. It's basically a transponder key. Okay, so when it comes to performance hybrid electric vehicles, PHEV, I guess that's what they call it for short, there's not a lot of cars in this classification or in this class, right? In the past, it was only hypercars. Hypercars were the only ones, but now you got all these companies like Lamborghini, Ferrari, they're all coming up with these performance hybrid electric vehicles. The Acura NSX, of course, I keep going back to, the Type-S has that technology. So does this car behind me, the 296. But what are the things that we think about with hybrid electric, right? So usually, when people say, well, I got a hybrid electric vehicle, people think, oh my God, the car is going to be so heavy, weight, right? It's going to be overcomplicated, or even that it's going to be very expensive, right? So, I think this Ferrari behind me, it does check some of those boxes. It is a very overly complicated car, but the good thing about it is has quite a bit of performance behind it, and the performance side of it with the 800 some horsepower is a very, very enticing fact. One of the things I loved most about the older 458 and some of the other Ferraris was the push button start that was on the steering wheel, if you guys remember, right about here. This modern Ferrari now has changed everything. So now they got rid of pretty much all the buttons. So I guess the bonus is no more sticky buttons, right? Because if you guys remember the sticky button issue with the older Ferraris. However, now you have no buttons. So no buttons means no sticky buttons. However, the problem is everything is now done through this touchpad. So even my favorite start button is no longer a start button. Now if you look, I have to touch this. So now it's going to power up. We'll close the door here. And then you have to hit it again to start the car. So now we're starting up in hybrid mode. And then in hybrid mode, you want to kick in the gas motor, you touch in this little flag here, and boom, the motor kicks in. But one thing that the problem here is now I have no buttons. Besides the turn signals, you really have no buttons. Everything is done through this complicated steering wheel. So you got all these touch sensitive pieces here. You got more touch buttons here on the right for your mirrors. And then you got touch buttons here on the left for all your temperature control, right? But pretty much when you're driving, the only thing you really can do is this thing, which is kind of cool. This is your race. You got your sport mode. You got your back to race, CT off. So it's got all, this is the only button besides the turn signals. Everything else is done through this intuitive touchpad, which I have yet to master really. But I mean, you really have to kind of, it's a little laggy. Then you can see, you can select different things with this touchpad. But you know, when you're going fast, which in a Ferrari, you're almost always going fast, trying to figure out this touch screen is really tricky. It took me a while just to get the music going, you know, going into audio here. So not exactly my favorite thing on this car. I do miss the buttons, but I mean, I guess that's how modern cars are these days. They're trying to get rid of all the buttons. Oh, actually, I take that back. You do have a couple buttons down here. You got your power window switches, your reverse manual, your hazard button. So there are some buttons there. But up top, you really don't have many. All right, so we're gonna shut the car off. You just touch this button again. There it goes. One thing we found funny was we do like the Apple CarPlay interface, but why does it have to cover the whole speedometer? This is one of those cars that when you drive it fast, which is almost always, you really need a secondary screen. And in the day of modern cars where there's too many screens, this Ferrari really could use a second screen somewhere. This glass is actually tinted, right? The tinted glass hides the motor. I don't know why Ferrari tinted it, but it looks pretty cool. So the glass actually opens up. There's a little lever here. So you pull this lever here on the side, and then this glass opens up. So I'll show you the motor real quick. It's a V6. You see all the orange cables is all the hybrid EV technology. But one thing I was surprised is I'm surprised why Ferrari didn't paint these red, you know, because all the Ferrari engines are red. But I thought this was kind of cool. They have a chassis number there at the bottom, so each chassis is numbered. The engine's a 6. It's got electric propulsion boost there, so that's pretty neat. And then coming around the car, you know how we couldn't figure out the radio? I finally figured out where the volume control is on the radio. So if we look, yeah, you want to come back behind here. Look, there's a little rotary knob back here. You see this? There's your volume control. So this whole time we were thinking the volume control was this button up here in the front, but it's actually hidden behind the unit. So there you go, volume control, and then the radio. Fine, the front looks kind of Ferrari-ish. The middle, when you look at it right here, it looks kind of like Lotus Evora.
I was gonna say this part here, the roof structure looks very Lotus.
Yeah, Lotus. Yeah. And then when you get to the back, I think a cross between Corvette, C8, and Ford GT, because it's got that rounded section with the taillights that kind of look like the old retro style. Oh. You know, so it's kind of a 3-tri design kind of scheme to it. You know.
I think this car is aimed for the modern 911 driver or modern 911 buyer, but wants something better than a 911.
Or a little more eye-catching, a little more exotic.
Yeah.
You know,
I would
driving
say
this around,
that does.
people do look at it.
Yeah.
You're like, what the hell is that? Because people didn't know it was a Ferrari even. They're like, what is that thing? I said, oh, this is the new 296. They're like, 290 what? Nobody knows about this particular model. With the production of the first generation NSX ending in 2005, Honda and Acura announced that they would produce a replacement NSX rumored to have a V10 motor in the vehicle. But when the vehicle was finally developed and produced as a second generation NSX, the motor became a V6 twin turbo with hybrid electric motors, which a lot of people didn't like at the time. In the cabin of the NSX Type-S, immediately when you get in this car, you have a familiarity with the cabin. The reason being, this is an Acura, right? So a lot of the parts on this car are interchangeable from other Acuras. Unlike the Ferrari, you don't need to read the manual and you can figure everything out. Like I know right away volume control is here. You know, I'm gonna turn the radio up. I got my temperature controls. I got my touch screen. It's got Apple CarPlay. The start button is right here, nicely labeled. You know, I got the carbon paddles. But when you look at it a little bit closer, you're gonna notice that even though everything's familiar to you, there's things about the car that are different from the Ferrari, right? And we're talking about the 296, right? So number one big difference between the two cars, you're gonna notice the paddles. The paddle shifters are no longer on the steering column. Now they're located on the steering wheel. So if you're turning the wheel, the paddles is always gonna be with the steering wheel. It is no longer fixed to the column. I don't know if that's a good thing. I actually prefer the paddles on the column because it's easier to hit it. What happens is on the racetrack, if you're going really fast and you're turning this wheel left and right, you have to look for that paddle, where that paddle is. It could be anywhere along the 360 circumference of the wheel. So I don't think I like the paddles on the wheel as much. It is more commonly found on more commercial type cars, but on cars like the Ferrari and the Lambo, the paddle shifters are always going to be on the steering column itself. But otherwise, you know, when you're in the cabin, this cabin feels a little bit tighter than the Ferrari. Everything is kind of close knit. If you look, the controls, everything kind of wraps around the driver. Listening to the sound, we're going at 65 miles an hour. It is not incredibly intrusive. If you get on it, which I'll do in a minute, you can hear it does open up a little bit, but definitely not as loud, and there's no humming like the Ferrari has. All right, so we're gonna downshift. Get onto this lane over here. You can hear a little bit of the wastegate sound. This is still a V6, it's still a twin turbo, and it's still got electric motor. So very similar powertrain, but only about 600 horsepower compared to 800 plus in the 296. You know, a good example of driving the NSX is like being in a fine tailored suit. You're very comfortable because everything around you you're familiar with. It's just a very unique cabin that everything you know where it is, your controls are, you don't have to guess where things are. The one thing I don't like about this car is when you're in drive, when I touch both paddles like this, on the Ferrari and Lambo, it goes to neutral. In this car, you can see it's still in gear. You cannot put it in neutral unless you stop the car and you press this button right here, the neutral button, which I think is kind of silly because if you want to be in neutral really quick, you have to reach over and hit this button instead of just going to the paddles and double clicking it. So right now we're in manual mode. So we shift using, we can shift using the paddle. So right now we're fourth gear. That'd be third gear. This particular NSX has aftermarket exhaust and downpipes, which removes the secondary cats. This is why this particular car sounds so good. The factory car unfortunately lacks a lot of this noise, which is unfortunate. So if I want to be in neutral right now, I have to reach down with my foot on the brake. I hit this button, now we're in neutral. So now I can rev the car. But if I want to be in gear, I hit the paddle, you're still in neutral. See? I have to go over here and hit D to put it back in drive before we can go again. So this is one thing that's different. I think Acura, because it's more of a common nameplate, their cars don't operate the same way as a lot of sports cars out there. If you're familiar with McLarens, Lamborghinis, Ferraris, they all operate the same way with the paddles and the ability to go to neutral. And in this car, you can't get into neutral. So I'm in drive, so it's going to be in drive. Double click, nothing happens. The second gen NSX is the logical one, right? And of course, I have some bias because I have one. But I feel like an NSX buyer wouldn't really cross-shop this particular car, even though they are comparables in terms of the engine, the layout, the EV. Do you guys think that NSX buyers will look at this car before going to buy the Type-S or buy this thing instead of the Type-S?
Honestly, if you're already looking at this car, you're going to skip the Type-S. And you're not a true car guy in general. Or you might not even be an Acura guy. I would say the hard part about the Acura Type-S is you have to actually like the brand.
Right. The person who bought this car probably, when you say Acura, they probably are thinking about like an Integra from the 90s. They probably don't know, like...
They do not see this shield, this badge on the side. They don't see that. Or they see that and they don't care about the Acura brand. You know, time flies, right? When this car was being developed, the Acura team was using cars like the 458, the R8 V10, the Porsche Turbo, the GTR, the 12C to benchmark against the second gen NSX. But now in 2025, you got brand new cars like the Corvette E-Ray, you got the Altura, you got the Ferrari 296, which we drove in here. But these are all new cars against Acura's supercar. Let's not forget, Lamborghini just introduced the Temerario, which is a V10 EV car. So now in this high-performance EV landscape, you got a lot of competitive cars that are all crowding this area. All right, so I guess in conclusion, this 296 is a very cool car from Ferrari. It's very lightweight at about 3,200 pounds. It's super fast, 820 horsepower. I can't get over the looks myself. I know looks is always subjective, but I just can't get by the looks of the car. The back end, you know, a little bit too much Corvette, a little Ford GT for me. But overall, I think the car is a great car. It drives beautifully. You cannot argue with the performance of the vehicle. Looks subjectively, and then of course the cost, right? This is a very expensive car at nearly 400 to 500K. So I don't know if I would be adding one to my stable. Let me know what your thoughts are on this particular car and what you think is maybe comparable to the 296. Maybe it's something we missed. All right, till next time. See you guys. Have a good one. Bye-bye.